Hello everyone, welcome back to our English class. We are discussing the anecdotes, the best investments I ever made, aren't we? And in the last class, we saw that Mr. John shares about him with A.J. Cronin and he whispered something in Cronin's ear. And that took A.J. Cronin back to an incident that happened 25 years ago. Are you eager to know what Mr. John whispered in Cronin's ear? Let's read rest of the story. Read paragraph 10 to 13. I was a young doctor at the time and I had just set up a practice in a working class district of London. On a foggy November night towards 1 o'clock, I was awakened by a loud banging on the door. Hurriedly, I threw on some clothes and went downstairs. It was a sergeant of police in dripping helmet and cape mistily outlined on the doorstep. A suicide case, he told me abruptly. In the lodgings around the corner, I had better come at once. We walked the short distance in silence, and our footsteps muffled by the fog, and turned into the narrow entrance of an old building. As we mounted the creaking staircase, my nostrils were stung by the sick, sweet odor of illuminating gas. On the upper story, the agitated landlady showed us to a bare little attic where, stretched on a narrow bed, lay the body of a young man. Although apparently lifeless, there remained the barest chance that the youth was not quite beyond recall. With the surgeon's help, I began the work of resuscitation. For an entire hour, we labored without success. Despite our most strenuous exertions, it appeared useless. Then, as we were about to give up, completely exhausted, there broke from the patient a shallow, convulsive gasp. Half an hour of redoubled efforts, and we had the youth sitting up, gazing at us dazedly. Slowly, he seemed to be realizing the horror of his situation. As he regained his strength, he told us his story. His parents were dead. An uncle had found him a position as a clerk in a London solicitor's office. He had been in the city only 6 months. Utterly friendless, he had fallen victim to the loose society of the streets, had made bad companions, and like a young fool, eager to taste pleasure far beyond his means, had begun to bet on horses. Soon he had lost all his small savings, had pledged his belongings, and owed the bookmaker a disastrous amount. In an effort to recoup, he had taken a sum of money from the office safe for a final gamble that he was assured was certain to win. But this last resort had failed. Terrified of the prosecution that must follow, sick at heart, sunk in despair, he had shut himself in his room and turned on the gas. Hope you have read along with me. Hope you have underlined the unfamiliar words. Let's comprehend the paragraphs 10 and 11. So, we are going to understand the flashback that happened 25 years back. So, we know that our narrator was a doctor, and when the flashback happened, he was a young doctor and he had just set up a practice in a working class district of London. You have read that I was awakened by a loud banging on the door. Who was banging on the door and why? Who was banging on the door of A.J. Cronin and why? Yes. A sergeant of police was banging on the door. He came to take Dr. A.J. Cronin to attend a suicide case happened in the nearby lodge. The sergeant of police came to tell him about a suicide case in the lodgings around the corner, and he wanted the doctor to go with him at once. At once means immediately. The sergeant of police and A.J. Cronin walked through the fog in silence, and they reached at an old building. Here is a question for you. What smell did Dr. A.J. Cronin get while mounting the creaking staircase of the old building? What was that smell? Yes. He got the smell of illuminating gas. He got the smell, the odor of illuminating gas. The narrator is A.J. Cronin and Sergeant Sue, the landlady, and she showed them a bare little attic where, stretched on a narrow bed, lay the body of a young man. Do you know what is attic? Attic is a space or room inside or partly inside the roof of a building. Here is the picture. This is what we call attic. What might have happened in the life of that young man? Let's find it out from the next two paragraphs. Let's read paragraph number 12 and 13. Although apparently lifeless, there remained the barest chance that the young was not quite beyond recall. With the surgeon's help, I began the work of resuscitation. For an entire hour, we labored without success. Despite our most strenuous exertions, it appeared useless. Then, as we were about to give up, completely exhausted, there broke from the patient a shallow, convulsive gasp. Half an hour of redoubled efforts, and we had the youth sitting up, gazing at us dazedly. Slowly, he seemed to be realizing the horror of his situation. As he regained his strength, he told us his story. His parents were dead. An uncle had found him a position as clerk in a London solicitor's office. He had been in the city only 6 months. Utterly friendless, he had fallen victim to the loose society of the streets, had made bad companions, and like a young fool, eager to taste pleasure far beyond his means, had begun to bet on horses. Soon he had lost all his small savings, had pledged his belongings, and owed the bookmaker a disastrous amount. In an effort to recoup, he had taken a sum of money from the office safe for a final gamble that he was assured was certain to win. But this last resort had failed. Terrified of the prosecution that must follow, sick at heart, sunk in despair, he had shut himself in his room and turned on the gas. Have you completed the reading? Did you get a relief after reading the paragraphs? Paragraph number 12 and 13? I got a relief. Why? Yes, the young man didn't die. Here is a question. What did the doctor do to save the life of the young man? What did A.J. Cronin do to save the life of the young man? Yes. Dr. Cronin did the work of resuscitation with the help of the surgeon. The word resuscitation means the act of bringing someone back to consciousness. That is what we call resuscitation. See the words strenuous and convulsive gasp. The word strenuous means that needing great effort and energy. And the word convulsive means sudden and impossible to control. The word gasp means a quick, deep breath. So, convulsive gasp means uncontrollable breath, a sudden breath. When they were about to give up, the patient released a convulsive gasp, a sudden, deep breath. That showed he is not died. And then Mr. A.J. Cronin, with the help of the surgeon, he redoubled his resuscitation work and he succeeded in it. Here is a question for you. When the patient regained his consciousness, what did he tell A.J. Cronin about him? What did he tell after he regained his strength? Exactly. He told him where he was working and what led him to make an attempt to suicide. He explained everything about him to A.J. Cronin and the sergeant of police. His parents were dead. His uncle found him a job as clerk in a London solicitor's office. He had been in the city only 6 months. Utterly friendless, he had fallen victim to the loose society of the streets and he had made bad companions. Utterly friendless, he had fallen victim to the loose society of the streets. What does the author mean by this statement? What he may be mean by that statement? Utterly friendless, he had fallen victim to the loose society of the streets. Yeah. The author means by this statement that the young man made bad companions and ran behind the pleasures of life, gambled and lost everything he had earned. That is what Mr. A.J. Cronin mean by the statement. Utterly friendless, he had fallen victim to the loose society of the streets. Here is another question for you. How did he lose all his money? How did the young man lose all his money? Absolutely. He began to bet on horses and he lost all his small savings. Here is the picture of horse betting or the horse race. Horse betting is a kind of gambling, occurs at many horse races and it started in the UK. There is another question for you. Why did the young man try to commit suicide? Why did the young man try to commit suicide? Why did he try to commit suicide? Yes. The young man had taken some money from his office safe for a final gambling, but he lost it too. He became terrified of a possible prosecution and decided to end his life in utter despair. So you have got the answer to the question, why did the young man try to commit suicide? Haven't you? You may please read the paragraph number 12 and 13 once again. As you can see, there are 4 paragraphs to be completed. Let's read paragraph number 14 to 17. A long bar of silence throbbed in the little attic when he concluded this halting confession. Then gruffly the sergeant asked how much he had stolen. £7 10 shillings. The answer sounded pitiful. For this paltry sum he had almost thrown away his life. There was a pause. The three of us, the surgeon, the landlady, and me, as the sole witnesses of the near tragedy, had the same unspoken thought in our minds. We decided to give the young man a fresh start. The surgeon, at considerable risk to his job, resolved to make no report upon the case, so that no court proceedings would result. The landlady offered a month's free board until he should get upon his feet again, while I, making perhaps the least contribution, came forward with £7 10 shillings for him to put back in the office safe. The ship moved on through the still darkness of the night. There was no need of speech. With a tender gesture, Mrs. S. had taken her husband's hand. And as we sat in silence, I could not but reflect that it was the best investment I had made in my life. It had paid me no dividends in worldly goods, but had turned out to be immensely profitable. It stood out against all the bad investments I had made throughout the years, those foolish speculations for material gain, producing only anxiety, disappointment, and frustration. The last 4 paragraphs are great. Am I right? Here you can see a picture. In this picture, you can see the young man and the 3 witnesses of the tragedy. Who were the witnesses of the tragedy? Who were the witnesses of the tragedy? Yes, Dr. A.J. Cronin, the sergeant of police, and the landlady were the witnesses of the tragedy. Another question. How much had the young man stolen? How much had the young man stolen? Yes, £7 10 shillings is the amount that had been stolen by the young man from his own office. Did you see the word paltry? The word paltry means that too small to be considered as important or useful. In the lesson Snake and the Mirror, we have studied another word with the same meaning. Do you remember that word? Yes, meager. Paltry means meager, a too small amount of money or too small to be considered as important or useful. Anyway, so for £7 10 shillings, a paltry sum, the young man had almost thrown away his life. The paragraph 16 is very important. From that, you will get what did the 3 witnesses decide to give the young man a fresh start. Here is the question. What did the narrator, landlady, and surgeon decide to give the young man a fresh start? What did the narrator, landlady, and surgeon decide to give the young man a fresh start? It's very easy to find the answer from the paragraph 16. Pause the video and read the 16th paragraph once again. Okay, here is the answer. Sergeant of Police. The sergeant of police decided not to report the case of the young man's attempt to suicide to avoid the court proceedings. And the landlady. The landlady offered a month's free board. A month's free board means a month's free food and accommodation. And A.J. Cronin. He gave him £7 10 shillings to put back in the office safe. The doctor says that it was the best investment he had ever made in his life. Why? Why does the author say that it was the best investment he had ever made? Yes, you are right. The doctor gave him £7 and 10 shillings to put back in the office safe in order to save him from prosecution. Later, the young man became a solicitor and the director of a charitable organization. That's why he says that it was the best investment he had ever made. Do you think that that was an investment in terms of material gain? No, that was not. But his service, the young man's service to the society, was the real investment. And that was much greater than the money he invested. According to A.J. Cronin, the investment for material gain produces only frustration, anxiety, and disappointment. And so, Mr. John was the young man who was saved by A.J. Cronin 25 years back. So, now you have read the full story, the full anecdote, the best investment I ever made. Haven't you? We know that the word investment means the act of putting money, time, effort into something to make a profit. Here, the narrator invested £7 10 shillings, but he didn't get any material gain. But he could save the life of a young man, and it became an investment in his life. How? Yes. That changed a young man's life completely, and later he became a solicitor and a great social worker. If 25 years back Mr. A.J. Cronin didn't give him that amount, that money, or if he didn't save that man, the young man, Mr. John, wouldn't have become a solicitor and a social worker. That's why Mr. A.J. Cronin says that was the best investment he had ever done in his life. So, this is all about the anecdote, the best investment I ever made. I hope all of you have enjoyed the anecdote very much. And this is all about the lesson, the best investment I ever made. I'll be back with another video lesson. Until then, bye.